Fortnite has been out for a very long time now, and in that time they've added a lot of items. You know, stuff like guns, items, mythics, you name it. But as I'm sure you're aware, not all of those things can be bangers. So today I'm going to rank the top 20 most useless items in Fortnite. Alright, so I've compiled a list here of 20 items that I have deemed useless in Fortnite, you know, from across the seasons. I'll explain each item and why they're on the list in time, but before we get to that, I think I'd want to explain the tier list itself. So down here at green, we have useless. This is where the most useless items are going to end up going. Items that have absolutely zero use and you should not pick up or use in any way, and they are pointless additions to the game. After that, you've got do not pick up, where these are items with some usability, not much, and they're not really worth picking up. Bang in the middle here, we've got not viable. Now, these are items that are kind of, they do have a functionality and they have a place in the loot pool, but they're just not really viable if you're trying to win the game. Up here, we've got impractical. Now, impractical are items that are good. They're really good. They either do high damage or good healing, or they can do something really well, but they're just not practical to either find or use, or they have a certain amount of uses, or they're just not quite there. And then up at the top, the best tier, we've got not useless, which is well, it's pretty self-explanatory, really. All right, so we're going to start off the list with the lump of coal. Now, from the records that I found, the lump of coal was actually only in the game one time, I think. You could get the lump of coal by killing one of Sergeant Winter's minions in Chapter 3, Season 1, Winterfest. Now, I'm sorry to disappoint all the lump of coal fans out there, but this is going in useless immediately. How it works is you pick up the lump of coal, you throw it at an enemy. If it hits them, it does 20 damage. If not, you have to pick it back up again and try to hit them again. I don't think I really need to explain that this item is quite literally useless in any scenario ever. I can't think of a single scenario where the lump of coal would help anyone ever. So thank God it's not in the game anymore. Speaking of not in the game anymore, next we have the Hunter's Cloak. Now, a few of you might be going, what is that? The Hunter's Cloak was in the game for exactly one season, and I doubt it'll come back again. The Hunter's Cloak was available in everyone's favorite season, Chapter 2, Season 6. And you could only obtain it through crafting. What was the crafting recipe? I don't know, and I don't care. But you wore the Hunter's Cloak, and it would basically make you friendly to all wildlife on the island. This meant you could tame the wolves and the boars, and the raptors wouldn't kill you, and you'd kind of just have an easier time with wildlife. So already this item has some kind of viability, so it's not exactly useless, but the issue with the Hunter's Cloak is when it comes to how you obtain it. You could only obtain the Hunter's Cloak through crafting, which meant that you had to go out of your way to get the items for the Hunter's Cloak. Instead of maybe going for kills, or maybe looting a mythic boss, or doing literally anything else, you would have to kill a bunch of animals and just, I don't know, go on some quest to try and make the Hunter's Cloak. And really, the Hunter's Cloak didn't really do much anyway, because the animals kind of didn't really attack you that much. And if they did, they're like 3-shot with any gun in the game. They are really easy to take out. What makes the Hunter's Cloak even more unviable now is the fact that you can tame animals by simply jumping on their backs now. Before Chapter 3 Season 3, you could not do this, and the only way to tame an animal was by feeding it with food or using the Hunter's Cloak. But now, obviously, since we have the ability to ride animals and tame them through that method, we don't really have a use for the Hunter's Cloak. I'm not going to put it in useless, but you should definitely not pick this up or craft it in any circumstance. Next, we have the Bottle Rocket. This was one of the first useless Fortnite items. You'd think that this could do a hell of a lot of damage, but you're wrong. You're completely wrong. How this item worked is you'd throw it down on the ground, and it would launch rockets in a direction, and they would hopefully hit an enemy or a build. The only problem is that you couldn't quite tell where the projectile was ever going to fire. They had a slow fire rate, and they were really useless. Getting damage with these, let alone a kill, was near impossible, as you had to do advanced mathematical equations in your head just to almost hit the target. And if you're trying to defend yourselves against the bottle rockets, oh, let me give you a little tip. Move to the fucking left. This item barely scrapes out of useless, because if you're using this item against a player who is stood still, you could get quite a bit of damage in. So you know what? I'm going to put this in do not pick up. I'm going to put it underneath the hunter's cloak. Next, we have the impulse grenades. Now, this might be a bit of a controversial one because you might be thinking to yourself, but Craig, impulse grenades are so useful. I can use them for traversal and this and that. Yeah, and shockwave grenades are 1,000 times better. The only reason this item is on the list is because they've been made redundant by a new item that is better in every way. The shockwave grenade goes further and it gives you no fall damage. This gives you full damage. If you go too high or if you miscalculate your shot, you will die. Now, before shockwave grenades were in the game, these were a great piece of mobility that you could use to traverse the map, and they were really good. But now they're kind of made redundant. But let's say we have a loot pool without the shockwave grenades, then these would be incredibly useful pieces of loot. They're definitely not useless. You should definitely pick them up if you see them. They're quite viable. I was going to put it in impractical, but I'm going to put it in not useless. I'm not going to lie. Next, we have the wildlife. I'm not going to lie. These suck. The wildlife creatures are NPCs you can find across the map starting from Chapter 2, Season 6 until whatever season they were last seen in. The wolves, boars, and raptors could attack the player, but the player could also ride them if you tamed them. Eliminating one of those three would give you the meat item, which would grant you health upon consumption. You could also use the meat item to tame other creatures across the island. In Chapter 3, Season 3, the ability to ride these creatures was added to the game, which gave them a lot more functionality. However, they aren't all that. Why would you choose to ride a wildlife instead of driving around in a car? Car is slightly louder, it's quicker, and it's defendable. The car is a giant metal shield. You're out in the open with these. Not only that, but the wolf, boar, and raptor are supposed to fight alongside you. But they're useless. In zero build, sure, maybe they could get some damage off of on a useless player. But in builds, there is a zero chance. No chance. One wall is going to stop the raptor completely and make it pack up and go home. I'm not even joking, right? These things are useless half the time. The toad, I don't even know what the frog did, man. What did it do? The chicken is arguably the most useful creature on this list because it has had many iterations throughout the time. Did you have the Midas chicken, I think? But some chickens had a cool glow effect, and if you killed that chicken, you got a item that corresponded with that glow. So you could get an epic item, a gold item. You might have been able to get a mythic one, I'm not sure. The same went for birds, who I forgot to include on this list, but wherever I put chickens, birds go with them. Actually, no, chickens go above birds, because with chickens, you could pick them up and you could glide. Just not as much as you could with a glider, but you could slightly glide and not take any fall damage. For that, I think I'm going to put the wolf, the boar, and the raptor in do not pick up. Actually, no, put them in not viable. They're cool additions to the game, and I'm glad that they're there. They add a nice bit of ambience and life to the map, but they're not really viable if you're actually trying to play the game. They're slower than the cars, they're less defendable, they don't do as much damage as, let's say, a hireable NPC. There's better alternatives. The chicken, however, I am going to put into impractical because of its many abilities that I listed earlier. You've got the chances to get cool loot, you've got the glide ability, you've got the different kinds of chickens they keep adding to the game, you've got it's all good stuff. And the frog, I'm going to put in useless. I don't know what the frog does. Next, we've got the rusty can. Now, the rusty can is, I believe, still in the game, and the only way to acquire it is through fishing. If you fish into a non-fishing hole, you have a chance of getting a rusty can or a small fry, and usually you'll get a rusty can. The rusty can was the original version of the lump of coal. The lump of coal is just a reskinned rusty can. You can pick it up, you throw it, it does 20 damage, and you have to pick it up again. That's all it does. Put it in useless. Next, you have the pro fishing rod. The pro fishing rod is currently not in the game anymore because nobody was using it, I imagine. But when it was in the game, the pro fishing rod would basically allow players to get higher level fish. This was when Fortnite was taking fishing relatively seriously, and they kept adding new versions of fish to the game, like, you know, the Midas flopper, the Vendetta flopper, you know, all those kinds of fishes that they expected you to go out and fish for. Some players took advantage of this while most didn't really. They didn't really see the point, I guess. I believe you could upgrade the normal fishing rod into a pro fishing rod at a certain time, but I can't quite verify that. But the main problem with the pro fishing rod, for me at least, was that I could not find it. And when I could find it, I couldn't quite use it properly. There are only a limited amount of fishing holes across the island, and you can only use the same one maybe 3 times before it goes away. And the pro fishing rod took up a whole item slot as well. I'm not willing to sacrifice that whole item slot for a pro fishing rod, which might come in use at some point. The fish were cool, but you could also find most of them with the normal fishing rod, and they had better alternatives in the game, or the ability just wasn't worth it. For that reason, I'm going to put the pro fishing rod in not viable. Right, here we get into the controversial area. Apart from Apart from this here, but we'll get to that. All of these items, apart from the one I just pointed out, have some sort of viability. And I think I might get shouted at in some areas here. First, we have the... what is this? Makeshift revolver. The makeshift revolver was in the game for one whole season, and it was in Chapter 2, Season 6. The makeshift series of weapons were the base set of weapons that you collected in Chapter 2, Season 6, which you would then craft into a advanced or mechanical weapon, like, you know, a normal assault rifle or a pump shotgun, or you'd craft them into primal weapons, like the primal shotgun or the primal assault rifle. A lot of the makeshift weapons had some sort of viability. You know, you had the makeshift shotgun, which was okay, and you had the makeshift assault rifle, which was fine other than the bloom. They were just worse versions of the original. The problem with the revolver was that it had an incredibly slow fire rate, and it had incredibly low damage, and it had terrible bloom. I don't think I hit a single person with the makeshift revolver in Chapter 2, Season 6. I'm not even joking. That was one of my most played seasons, and I don't think I even got a single hit with it. This item is genuinely useless, and if I saw it on the ground, I'd rather hit someone with my pickaxe, because at the very least, your pickaxe is bound to get some damage in. Useless. Next, we have the Chug Chili Splashes. Now, these items are actually really useful. If you have them, they basically give you the Chug Splash effect, while they also give you the Pepper effect, which means you go quicker, and obviously the Chug Splash effect, which gives you health or shield. The problem comes with how you obtain these. Originally, when they were added in Chapter 2, Season 8, you had to pay for them. By pay, I mean you had to use gold that you obtained through games. This wouldn't be a problem except for the fact that they were incredibly expensive and you only had a limited amount. You had like 3 Chug Splashes for 500 gold or something. It was terrible. Despite their use, nobody wanted to buy them because of how expensive they were. They just weren't a viable option for the game. There have been other ways to obtain them throughout Fortnite's history, but most of them haven't been very, like, practical solutions or like guaranteed solutions. They were a very random chance that you'd find them. You'd pick the splashes up if you saw them, but you could never go out of your way to kind of get them because they were so impractical. For that, I'm going to put them in practical. Above the chicken now. Above the chicken. There you go. Next is Cash. This was available exclusively in the Pandora POI in Chapter 1 Season X, and I don't think this did anything. And I don't mean in like the makeshift revolver kind of way. I literally don't think this did anything. Useless. Now that I'm looking at this, I think I might want to move the makeshift revolver up a little bit. Okay, makeshift revolver goes in do not pick up. Next, we have the Unstable Bow. The Unstable Bow was a exotic bow that was available in Chapter 2 Season 6, and it might have been available later, I'm not sure. You could get this bow by purchasing it off an NPC for a certain amount of gold, probably overpriced. When you fired this bow, it would randomly shoot out one of the 5 or 4 random effects that a bow could have in that season. It could be a grappler bow, it could be explosive bow, it could be a shockwave bow, a stink bow, all that stuff. The problem with this is that every single bow type had a different playstyle around it. The shockwave bow was obviously used for shockwave, so you'd aim it at yourself. The explosive bow was used to explode builds or to get a bit of damage on players, so you'd try and shoot it into weak points. The stink bow you used to try and get players out of their box, so you'd shoot it directly at the box. And the grappler bow was obviously used for a grappler. So with all these different playstyles and the fact that this is a random shot projectile, it made it basically useless. You couldn't really use a strategy with this bow, which I kind of guess was the whole point, but that kind of made it incredibly unviable for anyone to use if they wanted to actually play the game properly. It's going in not viable. Next, we have the crossbow. Crossbow is a slow firing, low damage projectile weapon. When this was originally added, it didn't really have any use, but when it was added again back in 2018 for Fortnite, it had extra damage against brutes or zombies. The crossbow has retained its damage boost on brutes and zombies since then, so that's made it incredibly useful when the zombies come back. However, in a normal loot pool against normal players, this thing is useless. It's useless. For that, it's going in do not pick up. Next, you have the dual crossbows. I think that's what they're called. These were essentially just the crossbows, but again, except they had a slightly faster fire rate due to the fact that you had 2 crossbows. They had a damage boost on brutes, they come back every Fortnite. They aren't really good against players, and they are terrible against builds. However, they are slightly more practical due to their faster speed. For this, I'm going to put them in not viable. Next, we have the dynamite. The dynamite is pretty much a reskinned grenade, except it has an incredibly long wait time to blow up. The dynamite is kind of useless in zero build because you're kind of out in the open anyway, and players can just move to the side of it. And in builds, you kind of need to be playing against someone with an incredibly slow play style where they kind of stay in one place for these to be viable. And knowing builds, kids, that's not going to happen. It's a cool item and a cool idea, but it really isn't viable for Fortnite in this day of age, and it wasn't even viable really when they added it to begin with. For that, I'm going to put it in not viable. The penultimate item on this list is the Pizza Pit Box. The Pizza Pit Box was an item you could find across the map, just random locations and chests in Chapter 3 Season 1, and I think Chapter 5 Season 1. If you throw the item down, the box would open up, revealing a pizza. This pizza was divided into slices which you could eat or pick up. You could then eat those slices you picked up later. This would provide health and I think 50 shield maximum. On paper, this item sounds really good until you think, oh yeah, no, this is really impractical. To use this item, you'd have to already have the box in your inventory, throw it onto the floor, eat the pieces you want to eat, and then you'd have to pick up the rest of the pieces and then carry on your match with them. Which is not really viable because why wouldn't you just use shields or a medkit? You know what I mean? You kind of only use this item as a last resort, and you wouldn't quite bring it around with you. You'd kind of find it and use it when you find it. You wouldn't really bring it with you anywhere. I think this is a good item, but I think it's just not quite there, and I'm going to put it in impractical for that. Finally on the list, we have the Spire Jump Boots, yet another item from Chapter 2, Season 6. The Spire Jump Boots gave you glider redeploy if you triple jumped with them. Very specific, I know. If you jumped twice, you were able to get a bit of a jump boost and you wouldn't take full damage. Now on paper, this item sounds very good, but let me tell you how you had to get this item. First of all, you had to travel to one of the 6 spires around the map. Then you had to defeat the boss at the spire location and pick up this orb. Then you had to run the orb across the entire map over to the spire in the middle. Then you had to go to the spire in the middle and put it into a little hole in the side. After you put it into the hole, a few seconds later, the jump boots would come out. Now, I actually did it a favor and I described it kind of in a good light there, except it was a lot more difficult than it sounds. The orb had physics, so if you dropped it to, I don't know, defend yourself in a fight, the orb would roll away, and you kind of had to deal with it. This was a whole 5-minute thing, so you'd have to do this at the beginning of the match and just miss out on a bunch of loot. So let's say you wanted to go get the mythic boss at the middle of the map, you kind of just had to hope that no one else got it before you. If you wanted the jump boots, you had to sacrifice a lot of the early game just to get them. The items themselves are very good, and I think if they were reskinned and added to the loot pool today, they would be a fan favorite item. But because they were so impossible to get, they were really impractical. Well, there you go. That is my useless Fortnite item tier list, with the least useless item being impulse grenades and the most useless being Pandora Cash.